Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and today we get to meet my new friend, Dr. Shelley Jagow. Dr. Jagow is the director of bands and teaches band methods at Wright University in Dayton, Ohio. I met Dr. Jagow because I randomly went to her website and filled out a contact card and said, I'm using your book for my secondary band methods class. I'd love to chat. And y'all, I'm so glad I did that. So lesson number 1 for today's podcast. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone who's impacted you and just say, hey, let's talk. Don't be afraid of sending that message or getting on their website. You never know what it's going to come to. Y'all, Dr. Jagow and I are so philosophically aligned, but from two totally different worlds. She talks today about how she got into music, what she brings with her life experiences to the table as an educator, how that plays out in her band rehearsals. And I know there's a lot of choral people that listen, but you better hang tight because there are a lot of transferable moments here. We talk about how it's not just being afraid of failing, but needing those failures to figure out how to better teach and impact those students. We talk about selection of repertoire, music fundamentals, making the advocacy statement, and standing up behind the ideas that music should be for everyone. But my favorite quote is where she talks about the power of music, and she calls music the weapon of mass destruction we should all be using. Anyway, y'all are going to love my new friend, Dr. Jagow. I am really thankful for Kaleidoscope Adventures and Kinnison Choral Company for making this episode possible. If you want to jump in and have more conversations with us, head over to patreon.com/musicedmatters. That's where you can support the show and get bonus episodes, bonus content, and monthly meetups where we talk about things we've learned in the podcast and life in general. I think that's enough announcements. I can't wait for you to meet my new friend. Here we go. Today, on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are welcoming a band guest, my new friend, Dr. Shelley Jagow. Hello, Dr. Jagow.
Good morning, Emily. It's so nice to meet you.
I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. I have read your book. My students are using your textbook. Tell the listeners, who are you?
Who am I? Well, let's see. I guess a short story is I'm a music educator, like yourself. I love teaching students, and I love teaching it through music. So let's see, I grew up in Saskatchewan, so Canadian citizen, but I finally became an American citizen here just a couple years ago so I could vote.
Congratulations, good choice.
So all my degrees are in music education, and I went to the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. And then I taught for 5 or 6 years up in Canada for a bit in a very small rural school, similar to your situation when we were talking a little bit before this. And some of my most memorable teaching moments are from teaching in that small rural area. You're accountable for everything. Yes. You can't rely on private teachers in the area or an assistant or co-director. It's you are the program. Mm-hmm. So you have nobody to blame but yourself in beginning the fundamentals with those students and cultivating that relationship with the community. So from there, then I went to Columbia, Missouri, and I did my master's in music education there and taught in Missouri for a year. And then a friend of mine, Tanya, who's a conductor up in Canada right now, and she travels all over the world conducting, but she was studying conducting at University of Michigan at the time. And she called me up and she said, hey, I heard about this job at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And she said that it's for an associate band director. She said, you should apply for it. And I said, Tanya, this is the United States. All those positions usually require marching band experience and being a marching band director, usually for the associate director's position. And she said, well, but she goes, there's the catch. She says, they're a fairly new university. They were only established, I think, in 1967, which is very new for universities.
Yes. And
she said, so they don't have a football team. And so there's no marching band. And I thought, oh, well, what the heck? I'll throw my name in. Let's see what happens. Wow. So the rest is history, almost like 25 years, later, and teaching, several different courses here throughout the years, from woodwind methods and the saxophone studio I did for, all those years, except just the last 2-3 years, I've now moved more into directing all the bands and conducting courses and graduate conducting courses. So it's been a great ride. I finished, when I got the job here, I finished my PhD in curriculum and instruction at the Union Institute and University in Cincinnati. And my main mentors for that were Colonel Timothy Foley, and Frank Battisti, and Edward Wingard, just all fabulous musicians and educators and pedagogues. So that's where I am. I'm still here at Wright State.
I love it, but you can see so much of your passion for curriculum and engagement in your textbook, which we'll talk about in a second. But can we rewind back to what got you into music in the first place? What's your childhood music experiences like?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, we started band in 5th grade, and we had kind of a revolving door of band directors, being in a small rural area. So our band program wasn't that great, but we had a fabulous piano teacher in a town only about a half hour away. And my mom was fantastic in driving us, there for lessons every week. And we went through the Royal Conservatory of Music program, which is a great program in Canada. So all the standards and the curriculum that they have for that, there's theory and history that goes along with it. And then you go to testing centers in the cities, once a year to pass your, certificate to get on to the next level. So I think that really engaged me more so than my band opportunities. And when it came time to selecting a career, I always thought I was going to be a vet. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's all I ever wanted to be. And I and if I had gone that route, I probably would have had a farm full of misfits, cats with one leg and dogs with one eye. I wouldn't have put anything down. They all would have been saved. But then I realized in like 7 years to be a vet, that sounds like a long time. And when you're an 18-year-old in grade 12, it seemed like that's half of this time again. So I thought, well, what can I do? And so I thought, well, I'll go into music. And I just fell in love with it. The teaching aspect is what really caught me right away. And because I realized I felt quite behind, to be honest, performance-wise, from a lot of the city students, so to speak, that had private lessons on their wind instruments. But I caught up. I mean, peers were great, and we all, helped each other, and we got into practice rooms and studied together. And I just learned so much and just fell in love with teaching and going out and doing my observations and just trying to find creative ways to engage, to capture those students, because students always learn in so many different ways. My dad, I also grew up on a pig farm.
What? No wonder you have a farm of animals. You grew up on a pig farm?
Yeah, I do. Pig farm, grew up in 4-H, showed horses. Yeah. Don't name your pets that you're going to eat.
Oh.
No, I never did that.
I don't eat animals. I guess that helps, right?
I completely understand. But it was funny because my dad, I remember coming back, I don't know, I was like having trouble with math or something. And this was in university, and it's because you had to take those core classes. And there was a math course, and it was like calculus was just coming in then, and I was lost. So I came home, and my dad, he says, well, ignore all those formulas. He goes, think of it this way. And I remember him telling me analogies of pigs and farrowing crates and the numbers, and all of a sudden it just clicked for me. And that made me think, how many of our students are we missing that we don't teach in those different ways, and of course, Howard Gardner touches on that, even with his multiple intelligences. And so it's always trying to have so many different ways up your sleeve to teach that same concept to a number of different styles of learners out there. So yes, curriculum is certainly a passion that I have.
So tell me a little more about this, because I call it the revolving sushi tray. So have you been to those restaurants that have the revolving thing and like you just pick whatever you want off of the revolving conveyor belt?
Yes.
A dear friend of mine who's not an educator but has always been an admin for my choirs, one day in a staff meeting was like, literally you have a sushi conveyor belt in your brain and you just pluck whatever you need off at the time. But here's the question that I think you and I both get excited about. How do we help students put together their sushi rolls to then put on that conveyor belt? So where do you get your ideas? Where do you get your creative moments to teach each unique learner?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I'm not sure where all my ingredients for my sushi roll come from. I mean, you talked about the musical muffins practice thing for, which is just a cute little way to get beginners and band involved and show them how to practice. And so sometimes those ideas just come. You mentioned that you were a runner, and I used to run a lot until my knees told me otherwise. But when I was running, most of my ideas came to me when I was just out by myself. Mm-hmm. And some ideas would come, and so I still try to find some time where I can just, kind of be void of noise and let my own thoughts kind of come in. And students will come up with some great ideas. We could be rehearsing in band and, trying to get a concept across, or the style of music, or trying to teach an articulation that doesn't quite have the nuance or the character that I'm looking for yet. And I might throw some color words out there or say it needs to sound like this. And then a student could say, oh, do you mean more like yada, 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 yada? Like popcorn. We made popcorn last night. You mean like that initial pop kind of, and yeah, that's what I'm looking for, that crisp initial attack, that popping of that popcorn. And then I'll write that down. If students come up with these ideas, and I'll write that down. Like, I'm stealing that because that seemed to work. So, and not being afraid of failing. I think, when we all start out as young teachers, we want to do our best, and we're trying so careful not to make mistakes. And I think we need to make mistakes. And, I'll jump into some rehearsals or teaching and say, okay, I have never tried this. I have no idea how this is going to go. If it falls flat on its face, fine. We won't return to this method, but who knows? Let's see what happens. Here we go. And, just jump in with both feet and away you go.
You've been doing that from the beginning, though. I mean, you started in a rural community playing. Did you start with saxophone?
I did.
Okay, so you started with saxophone and you had piano, and you jumped into university, and even though you felt behind, you tried things like jumping into practice rooms with friends and figuring out ways to get caught up. So it makes sense. You kind of have I call it an experimental lifestyle. I walk into rehearsal, I'm like, I got a new idea. Let's see what happens. Okay, we won't do that again. Right.
Yeah, and that might be part of my upbringing as well in a small town. It's, when I teach in the cities, I find that so many students have to make a choice. They're like, well, you can be in football or you can be in band, but you can't be in both. Mm-hmm. And in a small community, we relied on everybody to make things happen. Mm-hmm. And so there was just better collaboration. And so we were in everything. We were in sports and drama and 4-H and piano and band and, hockey and figure skating. You name it. We did everything. So I think that brings a lot of experiences to your life growing up that maybe not everybody has. So I actually feel that that's quite a blessing. And even just growing up in the prairies, I used to write a lot of poetry and take a lot of pictures, and I love sunsets. I used to climb up on my dad's combine I'd sit up there at night and I would take pictures of the sun setting, and I'd write some poems, or I'd take my horse out into the fields, and, when the sun's going down, and when I had first started college, I felt behind, as I mentioned earlier. I thought, oh my gosh, there's so many things I need to do. I've never seen an orchestra. I need to get, go and see an orchestra. Yeah. But the more I teach and realize what music is about, it's about life experience. And I feel that all of those experiences I've had with nature and growing up on the farm, and, the work ethic and culture that our parents instilled in us, and being able to try every activity under the sun, has built my character, has built my soul to be able to help express that in my teaching.
That's beautiful. And I should have known you wrote poetry. Your writing in your textbook is so easy to read and digest.
Oh,
and
you're too kind.
I'm just telling you what the students say. It's easy to read your chapters. So I can assign a couple chapters and they don't come back to class dry. They come back excited to talk about concepts. The way that your textbook, and y'all, I will include a link to her textbook, and I strongly recommend reading it, even if you're not a band person. There are so many tangible pieces of knowledge, and I love how you've broken down the book. Well, before we talk about the main concepts of today, repertoire and music for everyone and fundamentals of music, tell us about this book. When did you decide you were going to write the textbook for secondary band methods?
Sure. It probably evolved a lot from when I was working on my PhD in curriculum and instruction. And because at that time I was teaching at Wright State, and found that there were so many great resources that we have that we can use in our instrumental methods courses, music education courses. But you'd put stuff on reserve, read this chapter from this book, read this article from this journal. And students weren't always getting there in a timely fashion to have them read in time for your next lecture. And I thought, and it's too much to expect for them to purchase, 20, 30 books.
Yes.
So I thought, you know what, I'm going to just try to put everything into one book, where there might even be some chapters that we never even talk about in our course, but it's going to be stuff that they need when they start teaching.
I'm so glad you said that. I just told them that last week. I'm like, it's spring break. You should take the textbook and look at what chapters I don't assign and read those.
You're awesome.
I'm so glad you've given me permission not to teach every chapter, because I want to. They're all so good.
Yeah, it would be impossible to go through every chapter in there. And
so many.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that there's sometimes, even telling students, you're probably going to walk into a program where your library is going to be a mess and you're going to have to clean that up. But I can't take a lecture. I can't afford a lecture to talk about that, but it's here in the book, and it's got all the steps, and here's how to do it and organize it. So you'll be using that someday. So yes, it's meant as a resource for things down the road, and budgeting is, planning, advocacy, things like that.
And what's great too are the resources you have with it, the forms and the documents. And again, even if you're not a band person, those have been monumental. The muffins for practice, that's from the book. So cool. And I use that with my choirs.
Oh, that's great.
It makes
sense.
Good to hear. It makes so much sense. Did you write that textbook, and then did you test it out on your students before it went published, or how long did it take you to put it all together and that type of stuff?
It probably evolved over 3-4 years, and probably more as chapters or little pods here and there. And that was probably the difficult part, is then having all these little piles of writing in the basement. It's like, okay, now how do you organize that? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I'm still honestly not happy with how it's organized, but it just seems like, there's got to be a better way.
Oh, I totally get it though. When I read it cover to cover, and then because I read it before I organized my syllabus for the class, and we pop all over the book, obviously, but it's so much fun to see. There's literally choose your own ending. You can teach from that book so many different ways that we as creative educators never get bored, which is, I just wanted to say thanks for doing that. It's great.
Yeah, well, great. Well, I might bug you for your syllabus sometime, because with the second edition, that was one thing I did want to do, is even try to make those resources more available to teachers and students, so that there's that online resource that GIA has connected to now, so you can just download all of those things. And so I would eventually like to actually include some sample syllabi from people like yourself.
Happy to do so. I have that and all the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints have been fun to make, using those forms and integrating them in. And then I did a research study in fall of 19 on non-traditional lecture classes, and created this mega list of ways to have class discussions without having class discussions.
Oh, wow.
And designed all these crazy names like rabbit hole and 1 minute speech and goose chase and toss the noodle, and hilarious. But we've been playing all those.
Excellent. Will I see some of that in your publication?
Not this book, but the next book.
The next one. See, look at you. You don't sleep, do you?
I do. I require a minimum amount of sleep every night. It's a thing. But I'm so happy to meet someone that, as just talking to you, seeing that you are taking your personality and your experiences, and you're taking the time to put it together so that we can all use it to further our future educators or ourselves. And that's really exciting.
Well, it is exciting. Thank you.
So in the book, you talk about repertoire, and the way you have the future educators proceed is through exploration of methods books and then creating repertoire kind of libraries. Why don't you give us a take on where you are personally in repertoire at the moment?
Yeah, that's something that always has evolved a little bit with me. Again, I think young teachers feel like they need to select repertoire from lists. And often it's because we've made it that way. If they go to contests and festivals, they have to select something from a list. Now, in ways, on one hand, I think that's a good idea, because, if you've got the right committee selecting what pieces are put on that list, they're going to be quality repertoire. But on the other hand, it starts to take away our ability to discern and discriminate ourselves as to what is or isn't good music. I remember Frank Battisti saying to me when I was studying, he goes, "We are listed to death." There's just so many lists out there. And even Tim Foley, chimed in that, we have to be comfortable with our own aesthetic growth and values, and be able to choose and select repertoire on our own standing and on our own grounds, because there's lots of good repertoire out there, and it's not always the one that's the most performed that is considered core or gems. Recently, I have found, I always thought that the top ensemble had to play the hardest, most challenging, newest piece of music. But I'm a music educator at heart. I wouldn't call myself a conductor at all. So I find that it's a real responsibility for me to select repertoire for the ensembles that they are going to be teaching with their ensembles. And just because it might not be the hardest piece doesn't mean it's not value. Our repertoire is our curriculum. It's our diet. It's the nutrition that we're feeding these students. And I also feel that we're teaching character. We're teaching students through music. Again, as I got older, as a young teacher, I just wanted to have the best sounding band. Like, I'm going to have the best sounding bands. And now I just want the best citizens in my band. I want to create students who grow up to be good citizens, who grow up to have a good work ethic, who grow up to have accountability and responsibility. And I think we can help teach that through our rehearsal structures and through some of the repertoire that we pick. Recently, in 2018, I wanted to use music more for a layman audience that is teaching more than just music. And of course, you can have concerts that's just a band concert. I mean, music stands on its own. Of course it does. But it can also serve as a real powerful tool to get a message across to your students and to your audience. And so one thing I thought in 2018, I put together a concert for the Syrian refugee crisis. And I got it to be as a collaborative event as possible, and found a Syrian American composer, Malik Benjali, who I then commissioned, wrote a piece for my saxophone quartet to premiere at this concert. And then he came in and talked with all our students. We wrote letters to kids in the refugee camps and had schools write letters and then get letters back. And I involved our Middle Eastern Studies professor here, Dr. Halaby, came and did a lecture on the Syrian refugee crisis and what's going on. Found a student on campus who is a biomedical engineer, and he's from Syria. And his parents literally were hearing bombs just down the street every single night, and he had his sister still back there. And so we just combined it into a social awareness concert, and we played "Give Us This Day" by Maslanka, and we just involved music as a social awareness, because I feel that music can say things and help us move and be inspired in ways that traditional words just can't. You think of 9/11 and where we all were, when that happened, and it was music that brought the world together. It was music that helped us to find the comfort in our mourning. And we just finished a concert last week. We just got off a spring break, and the music that I had in their folders, I'm not doing any of them. We have our first rehearsal today, and I've been thinking the last 48 hours, it's like, I'm going to do a concert, our last concert of the semester, where we bring an awareness to the heritage of the Ukraine. And we're all watching that as that unfolds right now. And it's awful. And so I'm trying to find some ways that we can include some music that brings an awareness to this, involves our students in ways as more than just musicians, but as human musicians. And just find the compassion and awareness that our world just needs to have. I found a piece, Kathy Lakuda, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's from Ukraine, a young composer now living in Australia. And I just emailed her yesterday, and I said, hey, there's this piece I found, but there's no recording of it, because I always like to hear a recording just to get an idea. And I said, but it sounds like it could fit a program I'm thinking about, and it's called Through Healer's Eyes. And it's her grandma when she was a nurse during the war, and some of the feelings and scenes and memories from on the battlefield. And she wrote it during COVID when we were losing many lives across the world. So it hasn't been performed yet. And so she sent me a piano reduction last night. And it's just this global awareness that we have now with internet and everything else is just amazing. And I hesitated to ask her. I said, I'm assuming you still have a lot of family in Ukraine. And this morning, because her day is my night here between Australia, and she already wrote back, and she said that she lost her composition teacher the first week of the war, and lost her mother here just a couple days ago because she was an MS patient and they couldn't get medicine to the hospital. And it just really brings things to awareness. And how can we as musicians and educators bring an awareness to this and a sense of healing? We're not certainly near any healing, but I think there needs to be an awareness in a way that we can all kind of express what we're all feeling right now. And not to forget, I have to say I'm guilty that was great. You did a concert on the Syrian refugee crisis, and it went great. And then it's out of mind. Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded that crisis is still going on. We're all upset with Ukraine, and there's 7 million Syrian refugees, probably another 7 million displaced still in the country. I haven't seen the news this morning, how many millions there are now with Ukraine, but I think we can use music as a powerful weapon. It needs to be our weapon of destruction in this world is music. So that was kind of a long-winded roundabout, kind of got a little off track here on repertoire.
No, I love it. I had goosebumps twice because, so often we get lost in the process of everything, the checklists, everything that we have to teach, everything we have to cover and prepare. But ultimately, that power of music, the reason we all come together to pursue this degree or to listen to music, that's the reason we exist.
Yes. Yeah. And we're, something else, if I can throw in here, Emily, is my colleagues, Gretchen McNamara and Bill Jobert, he came up with the idea of having another festival that we're going to host here May 6th. That is a festival that encourages the more performance and selection of music by underrepresented gender marginalized composers. Mm-hmm. And so this is the first time we're doing this, and bands, orchestras, and choirs are welcome to come to this. And if they play 2 pieces, at least one has to be by a underrepresented composer. And then we're bringing in a composer, Kataj Copley is a young composer, and we're bringing him in as our first inaugural composer that's going to talk to students and directors as to why is it important that you play music from people that look like me? Why is it important to diversify our stand? Mm-hmm. And kids in our ensembles will hopefully feel that this is something that I can do too. There's somebody doing, somebody that looks like me that's doing something that I love, and that's what I'm going to do when I grow up as well.
You'll have to keep us posted on that festival, and I'll put any information update on the notes for this episode.
Okay, fantastic. I will. Thank you.
That is so interesting, and to be seen and heard. And you do a great job. In the textbook, it's hard to have these type of conversations with our pre-service teachers, our student teachers, because yes, you have to learn how to teach the whole child, however they come to you, and you have to learn how to flex to the culture and the environment and be culturally aware.
Yes.
But it's so hard to teach that in a text, and the way you approach it is, just as you were saying, from the heart and motivational aspect, and then you're modeling through your selection of repertoire and through the programming. What a beautiful story. I'm really glad we talked about repertoire. This is fantastic.
Me too. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you for all your work you're doing, making this possible and saying these words so that both those in the trenches and those early teachers or pre-service teachers can hear that it's okay to not follow the ruler. It's okay to not go by the yardstick that's already created and live on the list or die by the list, but to create something that is meaningful and impactful. Yes. I really also love that quote that music should be our weapon of mass destruction.
Yes.
That is awesome.
Let's create some posters. We'll write another book. We'll do that one together. There's the title.
Music. I was going to say, obviously, we are philosophically aligned. I feel like there's a book coming. There's a book down the road. Hey, speaking of fundamentally aligned and all those things, let's talk about music fundamentals and your belief in music for everyone. Because what a great tie-in to the power of music.
Yeah. The fundamentals is, we all know is it's our vitamins. And it's something that's so important. And again, and I always go back to my early years of teaching, but I was terrified. I wanted the best bands, and I'm going to have the best bands. And I'm thinking, they just, they sounded awful my first few weeks. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm a terrible teacher. How am I ever going to get them, we have all these things to do. They have to learn which hand goes on top and which end to blow in, and then, oh my gosh, now there's a foreign language on their stand, and what does that note mean, and how do we? There's just so much going on. I thought I'll never get them to the level where I want them to be, and it forced me to think of priorities. And if you ask any of my saxophone students, I'll say, what is your first priority as a saxophonist? And they'll say tone. And then I'll say, right. And what is your second priority? And then they've learned to say tone. And your third priority, tone. I'm like, yes. Okay, got it.
I'm so glad that you say that, because one of my least favorite words in the whole ensemble repertoire is blend. I despise that word. It's not about blending into the background. It's bringing your own individual sound, but knowing how to create that tone through breath, and for vocalists through vowel formage.
Yes. And that's where, I wish I had more choir background like you, because I find vowel formation and singing it creates such a drastic and immediate improvement in a wind band. You have them, even just sing a chord.
Mm-hmm.
Honor band, you'll go and you'll have them say, okay, let me hear a concert B flat, and it's this cacophony of loudness and blastissimo volume coming at you, and then you'll say, let's sing that note, and then they all sing it. And then, right, which is just naturally a more organic, beautiful, rounded, warm sound with some resonance. And then you say, okay, now do that quality on your instruments. Hear it, audiate before you just blow into your horn. And then it's immediate. Mm-hmm. But it's something we have to remind our students a lot is, are you thinking what it is, it's going to come out. Your best sound should be the very first sound that comes out of your horn, not just blow in there and then kind of mold it into where you want it. But you're always placing that sound, placing your order, knowing what you want as your tone. And then, of course, playing as an ensemble. With COVID, I found coming back, because we were a year and a half totally remote. Mm-hmm. Which, as you know, is not great for performing groups. And when we got back, I thought, okay, this shouldn't take us too long to get back together. And even with the college groups, they forgot how to play with each other.
I said people's lips are flapping in the breeze. They've come back and they don't know what to do with their lips.
I agree. I really thought that I haven't got COVID, and I hope I don't, but I'm thinking, well, maybe I got some symptoms from that, because I feel like a terrible teacher right now. I thought something, have I forgotten how to teach in a year and a half? Because things just weren't happening as quickly as I wanted them to, or I was expecting them to. And so teaching fundamentals with seasoned players, mm-hmm. It was starting all over again in just teaching us how to play as an ensemble and listening, on across the section. There's many times I've probably conducted less in front of my ensembles this last semester, which was our first semester back together, than I ever have. You talk about silent rehearsals and different ways you can, do some rehearsal strategies, but I'll often just get off the podium, and it forces them to use their eyes less and their ears more. Mm-hmm. And that has helped them to start listening to each other a little bit better and playing better. So, and it really wasn't until this semester that I felt that, okay, now we're getting back to where we were when we left pre-COVID, that we're learning those fundamentals again.
You're forcing them to go back to tone and listening, and through you stepping away, they're forced to pitch, rhythm, dynamics, all that jazz comes with it. But that makes so much sense.
Yes. Yeah. It's and it just works. It just works if we can get them using their ears.
I love it.
It will help in the fundamentals. And, you know, and I thought, well, is this embarrassing that I'm doing, you know, chorales and warm-up exercises and, you know, starting a note and then talking about how to release that note with a balance and a finish that we want to resonate into that silence. You know, I started all over on that again with the groups. And it took a while for them to create those habits, because those habits weren't there. And, you know, we've got students in there that are juniors that were freshmen when the COVID hit, that this is their first time playing in the ensemble. And that's striking to me too. And I need to remember, like, wow, we still need a lot of fundamentals, because we've lost a lot. We've lost a lot. But I feel everybody is in that same boat, and we're working our way through. But, you know, it starts with tone. It starts with tone. Listen to good music. Be relentless in asking your ensemble for good tone. Yesterday, I don't know that we got through very many measures with the concert band. That's what we did. We just talked about sound and balance and tone. And before I knew it, an hour and a half was gone. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, we didn't play anything. And they probably were bored. But, you know, I'm hoping it opened up their ears to realize how important that is, that, you know, we can't create a story or, you know, make the music come off the page until we have a good sound as an ensemble.
You're right. It all starts with tone. And something else you said in there, I don't even know if you heard yourself say it, but it's okay to let go of our ego and backtrack to the fundamentals to give our students what they need to develop that tone. Because without tone, there is no impact to the audience. There is no connection. There is no magical moment.
Right.
I love that. Okay. So you're dropping a lot of quotes. I'm taking notes like crazy.
You're awesome.
What are your thoughts along the same lines? This is so much fun. I can't stop smiling. What are your thoughts along the same lines of music for everyone? You said in our notes preparing for today that music should be for everyone. That's such an advocacy hot point. Can you talk about advocating for music for everyone?
Yeah, you know, we talk about, you know, Brown versus Board of Education, and everybody's got equal education now. Well, we know that's not true. You know, our opportunities for students and teachers are still very much dictated by our zip code. And so it's not an equal education. So, and it's frustrating, Emily, that it seems like every year in the performing arts, we are always advocating and having to fundraise and advocate to keep it in the schools. And that makes no sense to me. You know, when you go back to the earliest philosophies of Plato and Aristotle and those guys, you know, music is fundamental. There's that word again, fundamental, to the core of our character. And somewhere along the line, our educational powers that be have decided that, you know, that isn't so important, and we have to keep fighting for it. So we must keep fighting for that for everyone. I hope there comes a day that it's considered core curriculum and not extracurricular or, you know, an elective in our schools. And just the inclusivity of music for everybody.
I want to interrupt real quick. There's something that Dr. Jagow and I talked about afterwards. I need you to know that Dr. Jagow's wife works with people with disabilities as an orientation and mobility specialist. And Dr. Jagow's mom and sister used to be aid assistants as special education teachers. So as we talk about this next section, you can hear those influences coming out in her stories. Okay, back to Dr. Jagow.
My mom, my younger sister are special education. You know, they taught me a lot. You know, you'd come from a rehearsal where you're really trying to refine something. And then you hear about their day and their struggles and the struggles of students with special needs. And I thought, you know, or students with disabilities. And I thought, you know what, you know, this is, we're again back to that teaching people. And so we all, you know, thus the era began where we mainstreamed a lot of these students into our curriculum, and we figured it out. Whether that be on a percussion instrument, or have them modeling, or assign them with somebody. There's ways to figure this out, and that performance or that opportunity can mean the world for some of those students.
Mm-hmm.
I have a student now and plays in the concert band, and he's a fabulous musician. He learns all the rhythms. He learns probably the rhythms much quicker than anybody else. Mm-hmm. He's just such a delight to have in there, because he's really brought the perspective of what this does for him mm-hmm. as a player. And the band has just, totally fallen in love with him and embraced him. And he keeps me on my toes. I remember there was one day I said, okay, let's go back to rehearsal 93. And he says, he just blurts out, of course, like, 93, that's how many millions of miles the sun is from the earth. And I was just like, what, really? And it's like, so after rehearsal, I go back, and I Google it. Well, I'll be damned.
Is he right? That's so cool.
He's right.
I love those moments of,
and
so
you learn from these, you learn from your students as much as I hope they're learning from me.
Yeah.
So we have to remember to include everybody and keep music in our schools.
I love that. So you're saying that advocacy happens not just through continuing to show up, but also through that inclusion of every zip code, of every person. And we do that through repertoire selection, how we invite them into our class. And you talked about different modifications. It's possible. And you'll have to tune in. March is Women's History Month on the podcast. But I just interviewed Deke Sharon yesterday, and he is the mastermind behind the Sing Off and all of the Pitch Perfect movies. And he does a whole episode on advocacy and collaboration, and it's coming out. It's like episode 103 or something like that. I'll make sure to send it to you so you can get it. I think you would love his conversation. It's really fun. All about what you're saying. Everyone should be part of music in some way.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, this has been such a great conversation. I have some ideas for some books, so we'll talk about that offline so no one can steal our ideas. Yeah, I think this is so cool. Before you go, though, you've given us so many great tips about you and your story, along with repertoire and fundamentals and music for everyone and advocacy. What's the one thing you really want the listener to walk away from this episode with?
One thing. That's hard. Well, music keeps me grounded. When I have bad days or stressful days or sad days, it's the music that keeps me grounded. I have found in our students, there is mental health is a huge issue. And people out there need to realize it's not just our students, but, our teachers too, mm-hmm. Are holding up, the support for this system. So again, I think it just comes back to, I'm finding that we need to be the model for our students. Mm. What we do, what we say, they're listening and they're watching. And we need to model that integrity, that work ethic, that standard of excellence. It's, there's days where I feel, I hesitate to say this, Emily, but there's days where I feel sometimes students are still using COVID as an excuse. Mm-hmm. And I get it, but I also get that life sucks. We all have some really terrible things that have happened in our lives, are happening in our lives, but there's always something worse going on in someone else's life, and it's us. We're trying to teach. They're going to be our next leaders, mm-hmm. and I hope that I can teach them to have compassion and respect, but still strive for having high standards and accountability. Just put your big boy pants on and big girl pants on, and you can do this. Mm-hmm. staying in bed or complaining or making excuses isn't going to get us there.
Mm-mm.
And we're counting on you guys to look after us when we're old.
Just like you
So
said in the beginning.
I'm hoping we are training our students by modeling the kind of citizens we want them to be.
And that's exactly, you said you teach the whole citizen. You want your people to come out better citizens. And what a great view. Model being a better citizen through music education and the power, what do we call it? The
music, the weapon of mass destruction.
The weapon of mass destruction. I love it. This has been so much fun getting to know you. Thank you for answering my random email from your contact on your website.
Well, thanks for reaching out. And I'm eager to watch some of your podcasts. I haven't had the time to sit down and do that, but that's on my summer list to do, because it looks like you have just interviewed some amazing people and amazing topics. So I'm real eager to listen to them.
Oh, thanks. I'll send you the ones that I make all my band kids watch. You'll see it when I send you my syllabus.
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. What did you think? Did you learn something? I'm telling you, her book for secondary methods and those resources are the bomb. Highly recommend. My personal favorite quote: music helps us say and do things words just can't. And then my other, when she was talking about music fundamentals, and she said, it's like we're teaching them how to put the instrument together, which end to blow out of, how to put which hand on top or bottom, and then it's, OMG, there's a foreign language on my stand. I love that quote. I want to know what you thought. Jump over to emilybirch.org/contact. Please send me some information and let me know what you're doing. Better yet, patreon.com/musicedmatters. Join the community over there. But you know what? These conversations, they're an honor to have. And I'm so thankful for this platform. Thank you for taking time to listen. I hope that you got something out of it. But above all, I hope you know that you matter. We all know that music matters, especially teaching to every student the power of band, the power of music, and all the fantastic things we talked about today. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.